The night consumed everything, a relentless Texas border. Darkness punctuated only by the ambulance's piercing lights and the rhythmic wail of its siren. Outside, a dust storm raged, transforming the landscape into a ghostly battlefield where survival hung by the thinnest of threads. Elena Rodriguez wasn't supposed to be here. Not tonight. Not in this impossible terrain where hope and desperation danced their most dangerous dance. At 23, she was both an anomaly and a force. Of nature, a young woman who had long ago decided that medical textbooks were merely suggestions, not limitations. Her hands gripped the medical kit with a tension that spoke of years of training, of countless nights spent preparing for moments just like this. The ambulance lurched violently, bouncing over terrain that seemed designed to test the limits of human endurance. But Elena remained impossibly still, her focus laser-sharp on the critically injured child lying before her. This wasn't just another emergency run. This was a moment that would define everything. The child, no more than 7 or 8, was a silent testament to a journey gone catastrophically wrong. A border crossing that had begun with desperate hope had ended in near-fatal tragedy. Multiple trauma points told a story of violence, of a perilous journey that had stripped away everything but the most fundamental desire to survive. Elena's mind was a complex machine, processing information faster than the most advanced medical computer. Each breath, each slight movement of the child provided a crucial piece of a rapidly changing puzzle. She saw beyond the immediate injuries. She saw a human story, a life suspended between existence and oblivion. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a whispered wisdom that had shaped every moment of her medical journey. Medicine isn't just about healing bodies, Mia. It's about healing stories. The ambulance driver, a grizzled veteran named Miguel, kept stealing glances at her through the rearview mirror. He had transported hundreds of patients, witnessed countless medical interventions, but he had never seen anything quite like Elena Rodriguez. Her movements were a ballet of precision, each action calculated, each decision instantaneous. How much longer to the nearest trauma center? Elena's voice cut through the ambulance's interior, calm, yet charged with an undercurrent of urgent determination. Miguel's response was immediate. 30 minutes, if we're lucky. This storm, it's making everything impossible. Impossible was a word Elena had never accepted. Her entire life had been a continuous challenge to what others deemed unachievable. Growing up in a small border town, she had witnessed the harsh realities of medical deserts communities where access to healthcare was more myth than reality. Her mother, a nurse who had dedicated her life to serving the underserved, had been her first and most profound inspiration. From the moment Elena could understand, she knew her path would be about more than personal achievement. It would be about service, about bridging impossible gaps. Medical school had been her proving ground. While her peers competed for prestigious rotations and focused on building impressive resumes, Elena sought out the most challenging, the most human assignments. International relief missions, disaster response training, scenarios where medicine meant the difference between hope and total despair. Her professors had warned her. "You're too intense," they'd say. "Too emotional to be truly effective." But Elena understood something they didn't. That emotion, when properly channeled, was the most powerful diagnostic and healing tool. Now, in this ambulance cutting through the unforgiving Texas night, everything she had learned, everything she had prepared for, was being tested. The child's breathing was becoming more labored. Internal bleeding, multiple soft tissue traumas. Signs of severe dehydration, each symptom a potential death sentence in these conditions. But Elena saw potential where others would see hopelessness. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision, establishing in 4-line under conditions that would make most medical professionals surrender. She worked with makeshift tools, transforming the ambulance into a mobile operating room, her creativity filling the gaps where traditional medical technology failed. Miguel watched in silent amazement. In 30 years of emergency medical service, he had seen countless young medical professionals. But Elena was different. She didn't just treat patients, she fought for them with every fiber of her being. As the ambulance continued its brutal journey, Elena knew this was more than just a medical emergency. This was a moment of human connection, a battle against the cruel randomness of fate. Every second counted. Every breath mattered. The dust storm outside seemed to rage with a matching intensity to Elena's focus. And in that moment, suspended between life and death, between hope and despair, a legend was being written one heartbeat at a time. The medical school lecture hall was a cathedral of conventional wisdom, but Elena Rodriguez had never been one to worship at the altar of tradition. While her classmates meticulously highlighted textbooks and competed for the most prestigious hospital rotations, she was plotting a different course path that would challenge everything medical education assumed about healing. Professor Hammond's voice droned on about standard protocol, his words a monotonous backdrop to Elena's racing mind. She was sketching complex medical response scenarios in the margins of her notebook, not theoretical diagrams, but lived experiences drawn from countless hours of research, interviews, and underground medical journals. Her reputation preceded her, the wild card, they called her. A student who asked too many questions, who challenged every established protocol, who saw medical practice not as a career, but as a calling that transcended institutional boundaries. During her third year, while others were perfecting their suture techniques in climate-controlled simulation labs, Elena was volunteering with border medical outreach programs. She understood that true medical education happened far from sterile classrooms in the raw, unfiltered spaces where human vulnerability met human resilience. Her first international medical relief assignment came unexpectedly. A humanitarian organization needed emergency medical personnel for a complex mission in a region ravaged by conflict and environmental disaster. Most of her classmates balked. The risk was too high, the conditions too unpredictable. Elena saw it as her ultimate training ground. The moment she arrived in the war-torn region, Elena realized everything she had learned was just a preliminary sketch. Here, medicine was a live-wire connection between survival and surrender. The local clinic was less a medical facility and more a testament to human endurance. Makeshift walls patched with whatever materials could be found, medical equipment that looked like it had survived multiple conflicts, and the staff of local healthcare workers whose determination burned brighter than any sophisticated medical technology. On her first day, a massive bombing decimated a nearby residential area. While other international medical teams hesitated, argued about protocols, and waited for official clearance, Elena was already in motion. She transformed the crumbling clinic into a life-saving sanctuary with a speed and efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. Her approach was revolutionary. Where traditional medical response saw limitations, Elena saw possibilities. A lack of sterilization equipment? She developed rapid improvisation techniques using available resources. Limited surgical tools? She redesigned existing equipment, creating multi-use instruments that could adapt to various medical needs. Dr. Ramirez, the senior physician who initially viewed Elena with skepticism, watched her work with increasing amazement. "You're not just treating injuries," he told her one night, after a grueling 36-hour emergency response. "You're rewriting how we understand medical intervention." Elena's methods weren't just about medical skill, they were about human connection. She learned local languages, understood cultural contexts, and approached each patient as a complete human story, not just a collection of symptoms. Her most significant breakthrough came during a particularly challenging rescue operation. A complex multi-injury scenario involving victims from different backgrounds, with limited resources and maximum complexity. While other medical teams would have prioritized triage based on traditional survival metrics, Elena developed a holistic approach that considered not just immediate survival, but long-term recovery and community impact. She documented everything. Each improvised technique, each unconventional approach, became part of a growing body of knowledge that challenged existing medical response paradigms. Her research papers weren't just academic exercises. They were living documents of medical innovation. The Delta Medical Team, known for its elite emergency response units, began to take notice. They didn't recruit conventionally. They watched. They analyzed. And Elena was creating a body of work that was impossible to ignore. Her classmates were securing comfortable hospital positions in major urban centers. Elena was becoming something else entirely, a medical innovator who saw the world's most challenging spaces as her true classroom. By the time she completed her medical training, Elena had already transformed how emergency medical response was conceptualized. She wasn't just a doctor. She was a strategic medical architect capable of rebuilding healthcare systems in the most challenging environments. Her graduation wasn't a culmination. It was a beginning. A promise of what was possible when medical education met unbridled human potential. The whispers had already started in medical circles. "Who is Elena Rodriguez?" they would ask. And those who knew her would simply smile, recognizing that some legends are written not in textbooks, but in the lives they transform. As she packed her meticulously organized medical kit, a collection of tools, improvised equipment, and strategic documents, Elena knew her real education was just beginning. The world was waiting, with all its complexity, its pain, and its extraordinary potential for healing. The mountain range erupted before anyone could comprehend what was happening. It wasn't just an earthquake. It was a violent reconfiguration of reality, a tectonic rage that would redefine survival for thousands. Elena Rodriguez felt the first tremor through the soles of her boots before anyone else registered the danger. Her body, honed by years of emergency response training, was already calculating trajectories, potential damage zones, and rescue priorities before the ground had finished its initial violent convulsion. The communications center they had established just hours earlier became ground zero for what would become the most challenging rescue operation of the decade. Dust clouds billowed like apocalyptic curtains, obscuring entire landscapes, turning bustling mountain communities into ghost-like silhouettes of destruction. Most emergency response teams would have been paralyzed. Not Elena. Within minutes of the first seismic wave, she had already mapped out a multi-tiered response strategy. Her mind worked like a complex algorithm, processing information faster than the most advanced computer. Population density maps, geological survey data, local infrastructure details, all were instantly cross-referenced in her mental database. "We need to establish 3 primary zones," she announced to the assembled rescue teams, her voice cutting through the chaos like a surgical instrument. The regional emergency coordinators, seasoned professionals who had managed countless disasters, found themselves instinctively listening. Zone 1, immediate trauma response. Zone 2, structural stabilization and secondary rescue. Zone 3, long-term community rehabilitation. Each zone was more than a geographical designation. It was a comprehensive approach to human survival that went beyond traditional emergency response protocols. The first hours were a symphony of controlled chaos. Elena moved between medical triage, communication coordination, and direct rescue operations with a fluidity that seemed almost superhuman. Where most would see overwhelming destruction, she saw a complex problem waiting to be solved. Her medical kit was more than a collection of tools. It was a portable emergency room designed for maximum adaptability. Custom-modified equipment that could function in multiple scenarios. Medications organized with military precision. Communication devices it could work in the most challenging environments. A young rescue worker, Carlos, watched her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had been part of multiple disaster response teams, but he had never seen anyone work like Elena Rodriguez. "How are you so calm?" he asked during a brief moment of respite, his voice barely audible above the background noise of rescue operations. And in his response was immediate, her eyes never leaving the complex map she was annotating. Calm is a strategy, not an emotion. Every second of hesitation can cost a life. Her approach to the earthquake's aftermath was holistic in a way that defied traditional emergency response models. She wasn't just treating injuries or coordinating rescues. She was reimagining how a community could survive and rebuild in the face of total devastation. Medical triage became an art form under her leadership. Traditional methods prioritized patients based on immediate survival metrics. Elena developed a more nuanced approach that considered long-term recovery, psychological impact, and community. Resilience. A critically injured elderly woman might receive the same immediate attention as a young child, not because of sentimental reasons, but because Elena understood that each individual represented a complex network of community relationships. Her makeshift medical center was a marvel of improvisation. Surgical stations created from repurposed equipment, sterilization processes developed on the spot, communication networks established using a combination of satellite technology and ground-level human coordination. International medical teams began to gravitate towards her command center. What was initially seen as an unconventional approach was quickly recognized as a revolutionary method of disaster response. Dr. Marcus Reyes, a veteran of multiple international medical missions, watched Elena's operations with professional admiration. "She's not just managing a medical response," he told his colleagues. "She's conducting a masterclass in human resilience." The earthquake had destroyed infrastructure, but it could not destroy human potential. And Elena Rodriguez was living proof of that potential. Hours turned into days. The initial acute phase of rescue operations gave way to a more complex rehabilitation strategy. Elena was already developing long-term health intervention plans, understanding that the earthquake's impact would be felt for years, not just weeks. Psychological support teams were integrated into medical response units. Mental health was not an afterthought, but a critical component of overall community healing. Children who had lost everything were provided not just medical care, but hope-structured programs designed to help them process trauma and rebuild their sense of security. As night fell on the third day, Elena stood on a makeshift observation point, surveying the landscape of destruction and emerging hope. The rescue teams around her moved with a coordinated precision that she had instilled not through harsh commands, but through a shared understanding of their mission. This was more than a disaster response. This was a reimagining of human potential. In the face of absolute chaos, the whispers had already started among the international emergency response community. Something extraordinary was happening in these mountains. And at the center of it all was a woman who was rewriting the very definition of medical intervention. The golden hour, the critical window where life and death performed their most delicate dance, was unlike anything the veteran rescue teams had ever witnessed. A multi-vehicle catastrophe had transformed a mountain highway into a scene of unimaginable complexity. Multiple casualties, intricate trauma patterns, environmental challenges that would have paralyzed lesser medical teams. But for Elena Rodriguez, this was her crucible, the moment where medical skill transcended into something closer to pure human magic. The first responders arrived to find a scene of controlled pandemonium. Twisted metal, shattered glass, and human vulnerability stretched across hundreds of meters. Most emergency teams would have been overwhelmed, stratifying victims into simple triage categories. Not Elena. She arrived like a strategic hurricane, her mind already mapping out rescue and treatment scenarios before her feet touched the ground. Her medical team moved with a precision that seemed almost choreographed, each member understanding their role in a complex living organism of rescue and recovery. "We're not just treating injuries," Elena had briefed her team earlier. "We're preserving human stories." Her approach defied conventional emergency response protocols, where traditional methods would prioritize patients based on immediate survival metrics. Elena saw each victim as a complex network of potential medical, psychological, communal. A young girl, trapped between two collapsed vehicle sections, became her first priority. Most teams would have focused on the more critically wounded adults nearby. But Elena understood something profound. Saving this child meant preserving an entire family's future, an entire community's hope. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision and an engineer's problem-solving creativity. Custom medical tools, modified on-site, allowed her to perform procedures that would have been impossible under standard conditions. She communicated constantly with her team, with the victims, creating a web of human connection that transcended traditional medical intervention. Jack Martinez, a 27-year veteran paramedic who had seen virtually every type of emergency scenario, found himself transfixed. He had worked with countless medical professionals, but Elena was different. She didn't just treat patients. She engaged with them, understood them, fought for them with an intensity that bordered on the supernatural. The most critically wounded patient was a middle-aged man, multiple trauma points suggesting he had been protecting others during the initial collision. Elena's assessment went beyond physical injuries. She recognized the psychological landscape of his trauma, a protector, now vulnerable, who needed more than just medical treatment. Her team worked in a symphony of synchronized effort. One member stabilizing critical systems, another managing pain management, a third preparing advanced diagnostic protocols. But Elena was the conductor, her intuition guiding every movement. "We're losing him," warned Dr. Rodriguez, her junior colleague, looking at the deteriorating vital signs. But Elena's response was calm, almost prophetic. "No, we're not. Not today." What followed was a medical intervention that would later be studied in emergency response conferences worldwide. She didn't just use standard medical protocols, she rewrote them in real time, adapting techniques, combining approaches that traditional medical training would have deemed impossible. The paramedics and rescue workers from various agencies stood in collective amazement. These were professionals who had seen the worst humanity could experience, who had become almost immune to surprise. Yet here they were, witnessing something extraordinary. Jack Martinez, watching the intervention, leaned close to his colleague. His whisper would become legendary. "She's Delta's chief medic." Those 6 words carried more weight than any formal title. It was a recognition of something beyond medical skill, an acknowledgement of a transformative approach to human care that transcended traditional boundaries. As the golden hour progressed, Elena's team managed to stabilize not just the most critical patients, but maintained a holistic approach that considered long-term recovery. Pain management wasn't just about immediate relief, it was about understanding each patient's future potential. The young girl trapped between vehicle sections, rescued with a combination of surgical precision and psychological support that would ensure her trauma didn't define her future. The protective middle-aged man, stabilized through an innovative intervention that respected his heroism while addressing his complex medical needs. By the time the emergency phase concluded, Elena had transformed a potential mass casualty event into a testament of human resilience. International medical journals would later document the intervention, but no academic paper could capture the pure human magic of what had transpired. Rescue workers exchanged looks of profound respect. Medical professionals who had initially been skeptical now watched with a mixture of awe and professional admiration. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just performing medical miracles, she was redefining what was possible in emergency response. As the dust settled and the first wave of patients were prepared for further treatment, Elena stood for a moment, surveying the scene, not with exhaustion, but with a calm determination that suggested this was just another day, another opportunity to push the boundaries of human potential. The whisper that Jack Martinez had uttered would spread. From emergency response circles to international medical conferences, a legend was being born. And at its center was a woman who saw beyond injuries, beyond protocols, a woman who understood that true healing was about preserving hope. The conference hall buzzed with a nervous energy that Elena Rodriguez instantly recognized. This wasn't just another medical symposium. This was a battleground of ideas, a place where the future of emergency response would be either defended or transformed. She stood at the podium, not as a traditional speaker, but as a revolutionary. Her presentation wasn't a collection of slides and statistics, but a living manifesto of medical innovation that challenged every established protocol in emergency response. Behind her, a complex visual display mapped out her groundbreaking approach, intricate networks showing how medical intervention could be reimagined as a holistic, adaptive system rather than a rigid set of procedures. Each graphic told a story of lives saved, communities rebuilt, human potential unlocked. Emergency response is not about managing disasters, Elena began, her voice cutting through the murmur of the audience. It's about understanding human resilience. The medical establishment had always been a fortress of tradition. Protocols were sacred texts, and deviation was heresy. But Elena had been dismantling those walls since the beginning of her career, brick by intellectual brick. Her training programs were unlike anything the medical world had seen. Instead of standard simulation exercises, she developed immersive experiences that challenged medical professionals to think beyond conventional boundaries. Scenarios that tested not just medical skills, but emotional intelligence, cultural adaptability, and strategic thinking. Dr. Marcus Chun, head of the International Emergency Response Coalition, watched her presentation with a mixture of professional admiration and strategic interest. He understood that Elena was more than a medical professional. She was a potential systemic disruptor. The program she had developed went far beyond traditional medical training. It was a comprehensive approach to human crisis management that integrated psychological support, community rebuilding strategies, and adaptive medical intervention. Young medical professionals from around the world began to gravitate towards her methodology. They weren't just learning medical techniques. They were being taught to see emergency response as a complex, living ecosystem of human potential. One of her most revolutionary contributions was the Cross-Agency Resilience Protocol, CARP, a comprehensive framework that broke down traditional barriers between medical, governmental, and humanitarian organizations. Where previous models created silos, Elena's approach created interconnected networks of response and support. A case study from a complex humanitarian crisis in Southeast Asia demonstrated the protocol's effectiveness. Multiple agencies that had previously struggled to coordinate had now developed a seamless, adaptive response mechanism. Lives were saved not just through medical intervention, but through unprecedented levels of institutional cooperation. But Elena's impact extended far beyond institutional frameworks. She became a voice for the voiceless, developing medical training programs specifically designed for underserved communities. Her workshops weren't lectures. They were transformative, experiences that empowered local healthcare workers to become agents of change in their own communities. In remote mountain regions, in conflict zones, in areas devastated by natural disasters, her training programs created a new generation of medical professionals who saw their work as a calling rather than a career. The technological innovations she developed were equally groundbreaking. Portable medical diagnostic tools that could function in the most challenging environments. Communication systems that could create medical networks in areas with minimal infrastructure. Each innovation was designed with a singular philosophy. Medical care should be adaptive, accessible, and fundamentally human. Her research papers were more than academic documents. They were living manifestos of medical possibility. Peer-reviewed journals that had once been skeptical now competed to publish her groundbreaking work. But Elena understood true change happened not in conference halls or academic publications, but on the ground, in real-world scenarios. She developed a mentorship program that paired experienced medical professionals with emerging talent from the most challenging parts of the world. A doctor from a war-torn region could now be directly mentored by someone who had transformed emergency response on a global scale. The personal cost was significant. Elena's dedication meant limited personal time, constant travel, and a level of emotional investment that would have broken lesser individuals. But for her, this wasn't a career. It was a mission. Her family watched with a mixture of pride and concern. Her aging parents, who had first instilled in her the value of service, understood that their daughter was changing the world in ways they could never have imagined. At a private dinner with international medical leaders, Elena was more than a speaker or a researcher. She was a strategic visionary who could see the complex interconnections that most professionals missed. "We're not just treating injuries," she would say. "We're preserving human potential." The whispers had grown from a small recognition in a remote rescue operation to a global acknowledgement. Elena Rodriguez was rewriting the very definition of medical intervention, transforming it from a reactive process to a proactive, adaptive system of human support. As the sun set on another day of global medical strategy, Elena was already planning her next intervention, her next training program, her next opportunity to push the boundaries of what was possible. The medical world was changing, and at the center of that transformation was a woman who had decided that conventional boundaries were meant to be challenged, reimagined, and ultimately transcended. The small apartment in Austin felt more like a strategic command center than a home. Maps, medical research papers, and complex communication devices covered every available surface. This was Elena Rodriguez's personal space, a reflection of a life dedicated to something far larger than herself. It was 2:37 a.m. Most of the world slept, but Elena was wide awake, her laptop illuminating her face as she reviewed emergency response data from 3 different continents. A half-empty cup of coffee sat beside her, long grown cold, a testament to countless nights of relentless dedication. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother, Maria Rodriguez, a call Elena knew she couldn't ignore. "Mia," her mother's voice carried the weight of generations of family responsibility. "Your father's health is declining. The doctors say." Elena listened, her professional composure momentarily giving way to raw, unfiltered emotion. Her father, once a strong construction worker who had built homes across Texas, was now battling a progressive neurological condition. The medical bills were overwhelming, the emotional toll immeasurable. This was the side of Elena's life that international medical conferences never saw. The personal sacrifice behind the global medical innovations. The delicate balance between a world-changing mission and the intimate responsibilities of family. Her younger siblings looked to her as both a provider and a beacon of hope. Raphael, struggling to complete his engineering degree, and Lucia, a passionate high school teacher in a challenging urban school district, both understood the weight of Elena's responsibilities. Every month, a significant portion of her income went to supporting her family. Medical treatments for her father, tuition for Raphael, additional resources for Lucia's underfunded school program. Elena's global medical work wasn't just a professional mission, it was a lifeline for her family's survival and potential. The personal challenges extended beyond financial support. Elena's commitment to her global medical work meant limited personal time, fractured relationships, and a constant battle against professional burnout. Relationships had always been complicated. Her last serious partnership had ended 2 years ago, a brilliant epidemiologist who couldn't understand her all-consuming mission. "You're married to your work," he had said during their final argument. Elena hadn't disagreed. Her personal life was a complex algorithm of calculated choices and sacrificial decisions. Dating apps remained untouched. Social media connections were purely professional, and personal time was a luxury she rarely afforded herself. But Elena understood something profound about personal resilience. Her work wasn't just a career, it was a calling that drew strength from her family's own history of survival and hope. Her mother, Maria, had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and a nursing certificate. She had worked multiple jobs, navigated a complex new culture, and ensured her children received education and opportunities she could only dream of. Elena saw her own mission as a continuation of her mother's legacy. The Rodriguez family gatherings were legendary, loud, passionate affairs, filled with love, debate, and an unbreakable sense of unity. Even as Elena's global medical work kept her physically distant, she remained the emotional center of her family's universe. During one particularly challenging family dinner, her father, despite his declining health, looked at her with eyes that held both pride and concern. "You're changing the world, Elena," he said, his voice weak but filled with conviction. "But don't forget to live in it." Those words haunted her. How does one live in a world while simultaneously trying to transform it? Her approach to personal well-being was as strategic as her medical interventions. Meditation apps designed for high-stress professionals, carefully calibrated nutrition plans, virtual therapy sessions scheduled between international missions. Self-care wasn't a luxury, it was a professional necessity. Elena had developed a support network that defied traditional boundaries. Colleagues who were more like family, mentors who understood her mission, a global community of medical professionals who shared her vision of transformative healthcare. Her apartment walls told a story beyond medical charts and research papers. Family photographs, handwritten notes from patients she had saved, small mementos from rescue missions around the world. Each item a reminder of the human stories behind her professional mission. On her most challenging days, she would return to a ritual learned from her mother, brewing a specific Mexican coffee blend, sitting by the window and reconnecting with the core of her motivation. Not the grand medical achievements, but the simple, profound desire to reduce human suffering. The personal sacrifices were significant. Missed family birthdays, limited personal relationships, the constant emotional and physical exhaustion of a mission-driven life. But for Elena, these were acceptable trade-offs in a larger equation of human potential. As dawn began to break, casting a soft light across her meticulously organized workspace, Elena Rodriguez prepared for another day. A global medical conference in the morning, a video call with her family in the afternoon, a potential emergency response mission on the horizon. Her life was a complex dance of personal commitment and global mission. And she wouldn't have it any other way. The world was waiting, and Elena Rodriguez was ready to meet it, one life-saving intervention at a time. The first warning came at 3:17 am, cascading series of emergency signals that would transform the next 72 hours into the most critical challenge of Elena Rodriguez's career. A Category 5 hurricane was making landfall on the Gulf Coast simultaneously, triggering a series of industrial accidents that threatened multiple states. Petrochemical plants compromised, communication networks on the brink of total collapse, and a population facing multiple simultaneous threats that would have overwhelmed any conventional emergency response system. But Elena Rodriguez was anything but conventional. The Delta Medical Command Center became a living, breathing organism of strategic intervention. Multiple large screens displayed real-time data meteorological patterns, industrial infrastructure, maps, population density information, medical resource allocations. Where others would see chaos, Elena saw a complex system waiting to be understood and managed. This isn't just a disaster response, she told her core team during the initial briefing. This is a moment of systemic transformation. Her approach was revolutionary. Most emergency management protocols would prioritize immediate survival. Elena's strategy considered immediate survival, long-term community resilience, and potential systemic improvements that could prevent future catastrophes. The hurricane itself was a monster devastating coastal regions with unprecedented fury. But the industrial accidents created a secondary threat that was equally dangerous. Multiple chemical exposure risks, potential environmental contamination, and complex medical challenges that defied traditional emergency response protocols. Elena had spent years preparing for scenarios exactly like this. Her cross-agency resilience protocol, CARP, was about to face its most significant test. Within hours, she had established a multi-layered response mechanism that broke down traditional institutional barriers. Government agencies, medical teams, industrial safety experts, and community leaders were integrated into a single, adaptive response network. Communication became her primary weapon. Custom-developed communication platforms allowed real-time information sharing across previously siloed organizations. A chemical engineer in Houston could now instantly communicate critical information to a medical team in New Orleans, with Elena's system providing both translation and contextual analysis. The industrial accidents were particularly complex. A series of interconnected petrochemical plant failures created a nightmare scenario of potential toxic exposure. Most emergency teams would have approached this as a pure medical intervention. Elena saw it as a holistic challenge of human and environmental safety. Her team developed on-the-spot medical protocols for chemical exposure that went beyond traditional treatment. They weren't just treating symptoms. They were creating a comprehensive approach to long-term health monitoring and community recovery. Dr. Marcus Chun, who had been skeptical of Elena's approaches in the past, found himself completely transformed. "She's not just managing a crisis," he told international media. "She's reimagining how we understand emergency response." The technological innovations Elena had developed over years suddenly proved their worth. Portable diagnostic tools that could assess multiple types of chemical exposure. Communication systems that could function when traditional networks failed. Adaptive medical resources that could be rapidly deployed and reconfigured. But technology was just one component. Elena's true strength was her ability to create human connections in the most challenging scenarios. In evacuation centers, her team didn't just provide medical care. They created support networks, psychological intervention programs, and community rebuilding strategies. A child separated from parents wasn't just a medical case. They were a complex human story waiting to be supported. The scale of the disaster was unprecedented. Multiple states affected, hundreds of thousands displaced, industrial and environmental risks that could have long-term health implications. This was the type of scenario that could break entire emergency response systems. For 72 continuous hours, Elena Rodriguez became the central nervous system of a massive, complex rescue and recovery operation. She didn't sleep, she strategized. She didn't rest, she coordinated. Her ability to maintain clarity and strategic vision became legendary. International medical journals would later document the intervention as a turning point in emergency response methodology. But no academic paper could capture the pure human magic of what transpired. Government agencies that had previously operated in strict isolation now found themselves part of an integrated response network. Industrial safety experts worked alongside medical professionals. Community leaders became critical information nodes in a complex rescue ecosystem. Elena's approach transformed a potential catastrophe into an opportunity for systemic improvement. Every challenge became a learning opportunity, every obstacle a chance to develop more adaptive response mechanisms. As the immediate crisis began to stabilize, Elena was already developing long-term recovery strategies. This wasn't just about surviving the disaster. It was about building more resilient communities, more adaptive emergency response systems. The personal toll was significant. Her own family, located in the affected regions, became part of the complex rescue narrative. Her mother, her siblings, her aging father-all were both potential victims and critical support networks. But Elena Rodriguez had long ago understood that personal and professional boundaries were more fluid than most realized. Her mission wasn't just a job, it was a comprehensive approach to human potential. As the final stages of the emergency response began to take shape, Elena stood in the command center, surrounded by a team that had become more than colleagues, had become a family forged in the most challenging of circumstances. The world would remember this moment as more than a disaster response. It would be remembered as a transformation, a reimagining of what was possible when human potential met strategic innovation. And at the center of it all stood Elena Rodriguez, not just a medical professional, but a strategic visionary who had proven that in the face of absolute chaos, human resilience could not just survive, but thrive. The auditorium was silent, a rare moment of collective breath before Elena Rodriguez would deliver what many knew would be her most significant address. 25 years of groundbreaking medical innovations, global emergency response transformations, and human-centered healthcare had led to this moment. The International Medical Innovation Summit wasn't just a conference, it was a culmination of a life's mission that had fundamentally reshaped how the world understood medical intervention. At 52, Elena Rodriguez was no longer just a medical professional. She was a global icon of human resilience, a living testament to the power of strategic compassion. Her journey had never been about personal recognition. It had always been about something far more profound, the fundamental belief that every human life contained infinite potential, that medical intervention was more than treating symptoms, but about preserving and expanding human possibility. The audience represented a global mosaic of medical professionals, humanitarian leaders, technology innovators, government representatives from every continent. They weren't just here to listen. They were here to witness the evolution of a medical philosophy that had transformed countless lives. "We are not defined by the challenges we face," Elena began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, "but by our capacity to transform those challenges into opportunities for human growth." Her presentation was more than a speech. It was a living manifesto, a comprehensive overview of how medical intervention could be reimagined as a holistic, adaptive system of human support. The technological innovations she had developed over decades were now standard protocol in emergency response systems worldwide. Adaptive medical communication networks, portable diagnostic tools that could function in the most challenging environments, integrated response systems that broke down traditional institutional barriers. But technology was just the surface. Elena's true legacy was the human infrastructure she had created. The Rodriguez Global Medical Leadership Program had become the most prestigious training initiative in the world. Young medical professionals from every corner of the globe competed for limited spots. Understanding that this was more than education, it was a transformative experience that would reshape their entire approach to healthcare. Her mentorship had created a global network of medical innovators. Doctors who had trained under her leadership were now leading medical departments in challenging regions, developing innovative healthcare solutions, challenging traditional medical paradigms. A visual montage began to play a retrospective. of her most significant interventions. The earthquake rescue that first brought her to international attention. A complex industrial disaster response. Humanitarian missions in war-torn regions. Each image told a story of human potential preserved and expanded. But Elena understood that true legacy wasn't about grand moments. It was about the thousands of individual stories, the lives touched, the potential unlocked, the human connections preserved. Her own family's journey was woven into this larger narrative. Her father, who had passed away 5 years earlier, had lived to see his daughter transform global medical response. Her mother, now in her 80s, continued to be her most significant source of inspiration. Raphael, her brother, had become a leading engineer developing medical technologies. Lucia, her sister, had transformed educational approaches in underserved communities. The Rodriguez family's mission of service had expanded far beyond individual achievements. The personal sacrifices had been significant. Limited personal relationships, constant global travel, the emotional and physical toll of a mission-driven life. But Elena had never seen these as sacrifices. They were investments in human potential. As she continued her presentation, the audience was transfixed. This wasn't just a medical professional speaking. This was a strategic visionary who had reimagined entire systems of human support. Our greatest medical innovation, Elena said, her voice resonating through the auditorium, is not a technology. It is our capacity for human connection. Our ability to see beyond immediate challenges and recognize the infinite potential in every human story. The Rodriguez Foundation, which she had established decades ago, had become a global powerhouse of medical innovation. Not just providing resources, but creating systemic changes in how healthcare was understood and delivered. They had developed medical training programs for underserved communities, created communication networks that could function in the most challenging environments, and developed adaptive healthcare technologies that were changing lives globally. As her presentation concluded, the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. But Elena knew this wasn't about her. This was a celebration of collective human potential. Backstage, surrounded by her core team, many of whom had been with her for decades, Elena allowed herself a moment of reflection. Each person in this room represented a continuation of a mission larger than any individual achievement. The global medical landscape had been transformed, and at the center of that transformation was a woman who had decided that conventional boundaries were meant to be challenged, reimagined, and ultimately transcended. As the conference continued around her, Elena Rodriguez was already thinking about the next challenge, the next opportunity to expand human potential. The story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.